Welcome back to the Ed Block Courage Cast. Brett Dickinson here with Boomer Esiasion, 1988 MVP, 1989 Ed Block Courage Award winner. Boomer, thanks for taking a couple minutes with us.
It's my pleasure to see you, Brett. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, let's jump right into it. And I know we're talking a long time ago, but do you have any memories of when you were selected for the Ed Block Courage Award, being selected by your teammates, and kind of what that meant for you being in that locker room?
Well, yes, I do remember it was 1989. So this is, kind of like when I got involved in cystic fibrosis fundraising. This was well before my son Gunnar was born in 1981, 91, excuse me. I'd met a man by the name of Frank DeFord. Frank had lost his daughter, Alex, to cystic fibrosis. And I was at a dinner where I heard him speaking of this just horrific disease that I had never really heard about. And I went up to him after that dinner and I said, how can I help? And there were many fundraising opportunities in Cincinnati to be a part of, to get a part of Cincinnati Children's Hospital Cystic Fibrosis Pediatric Center was very big on my mind. So I did that. And I figured as a starting quarterback of a professional football team, you have a great platform. People were willing to listen to me. And I think my teammates recognized that. And I know that particular year changed my life significantly because I didn't really have anything in my life up to that point, like cystic fibrosis, to really fight for and to raise money for and to meet people who had the disease. And then lo and behold, 2 years later, in a twist of fate, my son Gunnar was actually born with the disease. So the Ed Block Courage Award was a symbol to me that whatever I was doing was recognized by the team, by my teammates. And knowing who Ed was, what he stood for, the fact that he was a Purple Heart recipient in World War II. My dad was a World War II veteran, spent 16 months in theater in Europe. I know that Ed Block was under General Patton. So there was a lot of synergy there and a lot of pride there, and something that I was very, very proud to receive.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on it. And then a lot of people see this award as something coming back from injury. Obviously, working with the athletic trainers, Ed Block being the athletic trainer for the Colts for all those
Yep.
years. But we always have these special stories that come up where it's somebody like you giving back or making an impact in the community. Why was that so important to you? Especially at a young age. You look back at it now, and you're a starting quarterback in the NFL, but you're still pretty young when it comes down to it. And why was it so important for you to be a part of that movement and kind of just engaging with the community and helping people?
It's interesting. So growing up, my dad, as I said, was a World War II veteran. My mother died when I was 7, and I saw him raise 3 children by himself. And he was an incredible man. He had to commute to New York City 2 hours pretty much each way every single day. We lived about 50 miles outside of New York City, so he had to take the train into Lower Manhattan. He didn't make a lot of money, but he came back on the GI Bill. And I always felt like his service was something that I was extremely proud of. And he was a Little League baseball coach. He volunteered for the local Lions Club. He was a part of Knights of Columbus. He was always doing something for somebody else. So I had the perfect mentor, if you will, in my life to show me how to try to live my life and try to give back and try to pay it forward. And I don't know what it is about meeting people like my dad and Frank DeFord and seeing these guys deal with the adversity that they had to deal with in their life, and then actually literally try to help others while they probably eschew the help for themselves. So I don't know. I've always had good mentors in my life. I've always felt like being a responsible human being was important, and especially being a man and being somebody that could handle adversity and deal with it hopefully the right way and help people that really, really needed that help. And lo and behold, if Frank DeFord never came in my life, I don't necessarily know that I would be sitting here today talking to you about everything that I was able to accomplish off the field as an NFL quarterback and a TV analyst. But I saw it firsthand, and I saw how powerful it was, and it really resonated with me. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to carry that along with me the rest of my career.
Yeah, and I remember the story when I was younger, hearing about Gunner and kind of that being all over the news and things like that. But looking back at those moments, you're full fledged. You're a quarterback in the NFL. We know what that takes out of your life and how much time you have to spend in the locker room. Talk about finding the time to make sure that Gunner was able to not only live a fulfilling life, but also now thriving, after you've already retired and he's out doing his thing. So.
Well, I was the football player. Gunner's mom, Cheryl, was the one that had the daily routine every single day with him. And when I was able to be with him, which was obviously in the off season when we weren't playing, I tried to create as many memories as I possibly could. The greatest thing that my dad left me, and my dad died in 1999 on Thanksgiving, oddly enough, and Thanksgiving will always have a different meaning to me simply because of that. But I remember sitting at my dad's funeral thinking about all the great memories that he and I had together. And a lot of them, didn't cost a lot of money. I mean, it might have been traveling to upstate New York for a vacation for 2 weeks, or playing baseball or catch when he came home, or going to Met games or Nick and Ranger games. Those are memories that I knew would last a lifetime for me. And I knew I wanted to be the same type of dad for Gunner. I wanted to be able to give him as many memories. And I was hoping that it wasn't going to have to be condensed, because he had a genetic disease where the average or median age of the patient at the time when he was diagnosed was like 19 or 20. We knew that there were new drugs to help the symptoms, so hopefully he would have lived longer. But by that time, maybe we would find something that would change his life significantly. So I just always felt like, I just needed to give him memories to hold on to, whether by bringing him to Super Bowls, bringing him to hockey games, putting him in ice hockey, letting him play football when he was in high school, all those different things that, dads share with their sons that I shared with my dad, that I wanted to share with him. And I think that resonated with Gunner too. I can speak to that today, now that he's 34 years old, and a major breakthrough happened in 2018 that changed his life forever, to the positive. So now he is a father himself. He has his own son. They delivered a grandson 3.5 years ago, which is nothing short of a miracle. And he is a living miracle, I should say. And Gunner is my hero. So, I mean, we have no other choice when you're confronted with a situation like this. And thinking back to Frank DeFord's words, thinking back to the way I was raised by my dad, I felt like, being I don't know, impactful in something other than just football was going to be a big part of my life, and certainly it has been.
Yeah, absolutely. As a father of two children at home, 8-year-old and 5-year-old boys, I've kind of lived by that mantra: is just make as many memories as possible and be as present as possible. I'm out on the fields, soccer, basketball, football, whatever it is, out coaching and just trying to be there with them. And I certainly appreciate that. And it's definitely an inspiration to hear you talk about that, knowing everything that your family had to go through, as well. And you answered my next question on who your inspiration was, and obviously your dad, and you mentioned Frank DeFord. So let's jump into kind of, you know, your transition. I had a chance to talk with Kurt Warner a couple of weeks ago, talking about going from the NFL to being in sports broadcasting and things like that. And, what kind of difficulties did you go through, when you did transition initially, to now be one of the most successful, past players to be still at it, at this point?
The hardest thing in the television world is just being concise, being smart, being somewhat humorous and self-deprecating. But you also have to be, I always felt you also had to be critical when you need to be. Like when the game is on the line, if somebody makes a mistake, and I'm not talking about a physical mistake, it's more of a mental mistake. You have to be honest with the viewers, you have to be honest with the fans, and you try to be as objective as you possibly can. How do you not root for, especially when you first come out, how do you not root for players that you played with, or coaches that you played under, or teams that you played for? It's almost impossible. But nowadays, I think simply because of social media, there are a lot more critics today than there were way back when I started back in 1997. So I just think that, for me, the transition was a rough one initially, because I only lasted 2 years on TV at ABC, got fired, went to Fox for a year, and then got to CBS and spent the next 22 years there. So I found my home. I think it was really important to find somewhere that I was more comfortable working with, people more I was more comfortable with. and they would bring out the best in me, and hopefully I would bring out the best for the shows that I worked on. And it was a transition that was hard, but I knew, because my son at the age of 6 at this point, was dealing with cystic fibrosis, that football was going to take a lot away from him growing up at that point. So the retirement part of it at the age of 37 was a little bit easier for me. I could probably have played another year or two, and the Bengals did offer me a 2-year contract to continue, but I felt like that would take too much away from Gunnar. And now I also had a daughter, Sydney, at the time as well. And I just think back to those days, no regrets retiring early, but just knowing that I could be definitely around so much more because of the TV schedule wasn't nearly as severe as playing football.
Yeah, and you look at some of these guys now, and you got Aaron Rodgers throwing 4 touchdown passes week one at 41 years old, Tom Brady winning a Super Bowl in his 40s. Do you think that was possible back then in the 90s, where you had these quarterbacks going into their 40s and still, playing at the top level? Or was it something where you saw like a drop off was coming sooner rather than later?
You know what, the thing in my era, the year before me and the year before that, the game was different. The rules were different. We took vicious hits. Many of us left with long-term injuries. I was fortunate enough to be one of those that didn't. I never had a surgery, never broke a bone. Excuse me. So I feel very fortunate in that regard. But the rules are different now. They changed them in the mid 2000s when Brady and Rivers and Manning were playing, and because they knew that those guys were the ultimate stars. That's who everybody wanted to see. And then you also had, Brett Favre and Troy Aikman, and you had all this group of players that, took us into the next wave of great quarterbacks that we're seeing today, and the money that they're making. And there's nothing worse than going to a football game in the middle of the year and having that starting quarterback that you're paying $65 or $50 million to be sitting on the bench because he's hurt. That's the last thing that any of us want. So the rules needed to be modified in order to protect the position. So if we had those rules back when I played, and I know I sound like an old geezer, I think a lot of those guys from my era would have played into their 40s, because I think of guys like Jim Kelly and Phil Simms and Dan Marino and John Elway and Bernie Kosar. I mean, we all loved being quarterbacks. We loved it, and we loved playing for our teams. We had great relationships around the league with each of the guys, but not nearly as connected as the guys are today. And I think that had we not got as injured as we did, we probably would have been able to play within our 40s, especially if the money had risen to the level that it is now, because now there's all the reason more
Right.
To play as long as you possibly can.
Right, absolutely, and then obviously advances in technology doesn't help, doesn't hurt either, with all the athletic training, and we get to work with the athletic trainers here across the league, and just seeing some of the things that they have in their rooms now was never existent back in the 80s and 90s. So, all right, before we transition, I'm going to throw you some curveballs at from the kids at St. Vincent's Villa. They have a couple questions for you. Before that, though, obviously we're Baltimore based, Maryland football legend. Can you just talk a little bit about the state of Maryland football, and where do you see that they can make the next jump? It's kind of one of those things where, they have a couple good years and then back down to a couple bad years. Like, how do they make that next jump? Knowing that the climate that we're in right now as well, in, the NIL and, basically paying players to transfer and do all those things. What do you see that Maryland football can do to kind of get back on track in college football?
I know we're only a couple games into his career, but this Malik, he looks great. But, if he is as good as we all think he is, don't you think somebody's going to come and steal him probably next year or the year after that? I mean, that's the real disheartening thing. Like, you develop players, and Mike Loxley does a great job of developing players. By the way, you ask a lot of coaches in the NFL about the Maryland players that come into the NFL. They're really prepared because he does such a good job. I mean, look, I think it's maybe a little bit more balanced right now with the way that they're using some of the money and sharing it with the players. I'm happy. I think that's a little bit more of an even playing field, because then it's really up to the coach to decide who he wants to pay and who he should be paying. I think it's really hard to win in the Big Ten. You got Ohio State, you got Michigan, you got USC now, you got Oregon, you got Washington. You have all these schools that, basically are well-funded sports-wise outside of the realm of just the money that they're making because of the conference that they're affiliated with. We have a very, very, and we've always had this problem. We've had probably the largest alumni base in all of college, and yet we also have the least amount of money that is donated to the sports program. And I don't necessarily know that anybody wants to donate money now anyway, given this whole new program and of sharing the revenues with the players. So, I mean, the last thing I want to do is write a $50,000 check to the University of Maryland so some 18-year-old can come and be developed and then leave next year. I mean, I'm not into that. So I hope that they can stay relatively competitive, meaning 8 to 9 wins and maybe a bowl game. And, that I think is something that's attainable. But to go for a national championship, when you look at some of the Power 4 conference schools and the amount of money and backing they have, I mean, you think of Texas, LSU, Alabama, Florida, like I said, Oregon, Washington, Michigan, Ohio State. I mean, these are multi-billion dollar enterprises that our football program has got to go up against. And I don't necessarily know that Mike Locksley is going to have a legitimate chance to win year in and year out consistently 10 games. It's just almost going to be impossible.
All right. All right. Let me throw you a couple hard questions. The children over St. Vincent's gave this to us. So I asked some, and, some of them are kind of stumpers. So, all right. First one is, looking back at your playing career, who was that one guy that you saw on the schedule that you got most excited to play against? Whether it be in a DB, defensive lineman, who was that one guy that you kind of circled and said, "Oh man, I can't wait to get that game going week 3 or week 4"?
For us, when I was in Cincinnati, our biggest rival by far was Cleveland, and it was the Battle of Ohio. And Marty Schottenheimer was the coach most of the time when I was playing in Cincinnati. And every time we would get the schedule for the preseason, you'd look at that game and you say, when are we playing those games? Because we played them twice every year. They were in our division. So it was the Cleveland Brown game, regardless of who, their quarterback was Bernie Kosar when I was playing for the most part. But their defense, I always knew was going to be really, really difficult. So I always knew that those games were going to be the most intense of all the games we played.
All right. And since being in the NFL, what has been your favorite thing that you've purchased? Doesn't have to be anything NFL related, maybe something off the wall. We've heard some really, really interesting answers here, but what is the favorite thing that you've been able to buy yourself since you started your NFL career and now going into broadcasting?
I would say my vacation house in Bridgehampton, New York. It's
That's
something that I always wanted when I was a kid. So I grew up as a kid. My dad was, probably we made about $50,000 a year max, and I grew up in a 1-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. I had 2 older sisters. Of course, my mom passed away when I was 7, so I grew up about 50 miles from what is known as the Hamptons on the east end of Long Island, and I would go out there with my buddies when I was in high school to the beaches. We have some of the greatest beaches, and I always told my buddies, one day I am going to have a house out here. And fortunately enough for me, back in 2002, I was able to purchase that house, and it's my prized possession, and it's something that I always dreamed of, and something I'm very, very proud to have attained.
All right, here's a good one. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
I love black cherry, number 1.
Okay.
And then Carvel vanilla, number 2.
All right. That's what I always say. Vanilla is the best flavor. It's not my favorite, but it's the best because you can do anything with vanilla.
Yes.
So that's where it's very versatile. So I enjoy that. All right. And then just to wrap up with you, can you just give us what your definition of courage is?
Well, courage is it's something that's built into you. You never know when it's going to show up or when you're going to need it. And there's different facets of courage. There's the physical courage of putting yourself in danger to help others. There's also the courage of, being who you are and being proud of that. There's also the courage of inspiring others to reach other heights within their life. And I think maybe one of the biggest aspects of my life was I was never going to fail. I was never going to give up. And regardless of, whatever the failure may have been, I was going to learn from it. And I do think that courage is something that is instilled within you from your parents or your mentors or somebody that you really do look up to, whether it be a school teacher, It could be a parent, could be an uncle, could be an aunt, could be somebody else that is on the national stage that may not know you personally, but you follow who they are and you realize the reason that they're there is because they put the hard work and effort into becoming a success.
There he is, Boomer Esiason, former Red Block Courage Award winner. Boomer and Geo on WFA and the Fan. Boomer Esiason Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about how people can get involved if they want to kind of support your cause?
Very easy. So it's esiason.org, ESIASON.org. We have many programs right there on our homepage. And one of the programs that we're really proud of is our IVF program, because you have to realize that when Gunnar was born with cystic fibrosis, one of the side effects of cystic fibrosis is that men are born without a vas deferens. So they have a natural vasectomy. They cannot be the biological parents or father of a child unless they go through invasive procedure with needles. So in 2021, Gunnar and his fiance went through IVF. And right before their marriage, they handed me a photo of a sonogram of my grandson, Casper. It lifted me off the ground. I've never had a feeling like that in my life. I don't think I'll ever have another feeling like that. And it was a finish of 30 years of just really hard work, getting to a point where now all of a sudden my son wants to be a father himself, which is something that I had always hoped for and prayed for. And our foundation now gives out IVF grants to CF families. And we have 11 BEF babies that have been born. And we have, I think, another 6 or 7 on the way where we pay for all the IVF. It's a very expensive process. We have to go through a whole set of circumstances to make sure we get to the end product, and we make sure that the families are the right families and are going to raise their children with the great love that I see my son and daughter-in-law Darcy do with their 2 children. So I'm really, really proud of that. So, you know, we're helping CF families, we're building families, and we're bringing so much joy to the world that if you want to impact that, you can at esiason.org.
There you go. Appreciate it again, Boomer. Looking forward to hearing from you all football season, getting those hot takes in as
Okay.
well. Certainly looking forward to another, 17 weeks of regular season football going. So
here we go. You're
here
right.
we go.
Exactly, Fred. Thanks so much, man.
No problem. I
It.
appreciate it.
See you.